You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. Today, we're going to talk about free time. It turns out that there is a way that you can consciously create free time and therefore free energy, because time can be converted to energy. And our guest today is a new friend, someone I met at the TED conference at one of John Levy's influencer dinners. John's been on the show talking about how he does those, where you sit next to someone, you don't really know who they are, and you try to guess what their profession is. So when we were going around the table guessing without really any information about someone, what they did for a living, for our guest today, Jenny Blake, who's an award-winning author of a book called The Pivot, that's a best-selling business book, just came out with a book called Free Time. But having to pretend that I didn't know that at the dinner, I said that I predicted she was an entomologist studying the larval stage of growth, which made everyone laugh, apparently, but was not at all accurate. With that incredible introduction, other than we met at TED, and she's an expert on creating free time in your life and has a new book on it that I'm halfway through. Jenny, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dave. You're halfway through after one day, so you win the award for speed reading. And you forgot to say that we met by getting lost in the building. And the super of the building was named Peter Pan. So Peter Pan helped Dave and I get squared away.
You could say Peter Pan introduced us. That's a good point.
That's right. Oh my gosh, that's it. That's our origin story.
Shout out to the doorman,
yes,
who was actually really funny. So Jenny, in addition to being a TED attendee and other stuff like an author, you spent 5 years at Google. You co-created their Career Guru coaching program. So you spent a lot of time working with people on this. And if anyone on earth doesn't have free time, it's Googlers. Like, hey, we'll lure you with free breakfast, lunch, and dinner and some activities after that. So maybe you could just live here or we'll do your laundry. So just sleep somewhere else, but everything else just works. So free time is, for all the Googlers I know, pretty darn limited. Was this something that you started paying attention to when you were helping people figure out their career?
Yeah, well, you and I both share a passion for human potential and what's possible in this incredible, miraculous machine that is our bodies and our mind and our brains. And I just found it so fascinating that when I joined Google in 2006, there were 6,000 employees. And because I was in a training role, I trained over 1,000 people in my first year. At that time, Google was so focused and skilled at hiring the best and the brightest from the best universities all over the world, the top 1%. But they didn't have any programs in place of how do you keep them? How do you keep them learning and growing and engaged? So inevitably, about a year into their tenure, all these new hires would come up to me in the hallways and say, "Psst, Jenny, I'm getting kind of bored and I don't know what to do." And boredom was this dirty word. And yet you have all these brilliant people who, as you said, Dave, they're not short on money. And yes, it is a very intense environment that can lead to burnout. So that you could say you're short on time, but they're also short on creative expression within that corporate context. So the reason that I started developing these drop-in coaching programs at Google, I still work with Google to this day through the Pivot method and my previous book, is that I discovered I call them, we know the term high net worth, people who've accumulated a lot of financial resources. But if you're a high net growth individual, money is important, but it's not everything. And you're not just asking, what am I earning, but what am I learning? Am I growing? And then now with free time, it's also about high net freedom. So I think more and more people, and we're seeing this with a great resignation, don't want to just go to the grind and be in a brick wall of meetings all day, every day in an inbox that never ends. Freedom is about autonomy, who we work with, what we work on, when we work, and so much more. And I was telling you before we hit record, that should be your fifth F in your framework.
Is for freedom. I love that. I might steal that. There'll be 5 Fs.
Right. We have food, fear, fertility, friends.
Oh, look at you. You skipped the F-bomb. Just so smooth.
Did my homework.
So freedom it is. And friend and freedom. All right, I could ask you something unrelated to all this. So every time I've met you, you always walk around looking like you're about to laugh. Like you're like almost stupidly happy. That's a compliment, by the way.
Gosh.
But you know what I mean? You're just like everything's like joyful and entertaining, and some people would be pissed off that we couldn't get up to the 30th floor penthouse and whatever else. But you're just like, this is all fun. Is that were you born that way, or did you just get a lot of free time?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so funny because when I was at Google, the trainees used to make fun of me that I smile all day while I'm teaching. And they're like, how do you even do that? How do you smile and talk at the same time? And then recently someone left me a review for my podcast and they said, Jenny sounds like she's smiling all the time, even when it's not appropriate to what she's saying. And so I don't know. I mean, this question is like, I'm just thrilled to be here with you. And this is my favorite thing, to just be in deep conversation, talking about interesting things and wrapping our minds around problem solving and potential and what's possible. So, of course, I'm smiling ear to ear because I was telling you, I wrote my last book entirely on brain octane and with bulletproof coffee. And so I don't know, who wouldn't be smiling just to be here in conversation with you?
I think I need to get you saying something like, congratulations on your leprosy. And then I'll make that in your normal happy voice. I'll
Oh,
make that my
shoot.
ringtone for you. So, it's good because this one was, I think I actually am happy I have leprosy now, but I don't know why.
Oh
And
my
guys, in case
gosh.
you're wondering, I do not have leprosy. I have projectile leprosy. It's a totally different thing.
Oh no, that means it's coming my way.
Still, let me point at you. Okay. That's all I'm saying. So, free time. You're a systems thinker, which is one of the reasons that it was fun to chat with you at dinner, because you're not looking at this as, just do less, which is what a lot of people say, no, more often. What's different in your approach to actually creating free time? Because people listening are going to want to walk away from this saying, how do I get free time?
Right. And I do mean it in the sense free time can be leisure time. What do we do when we're not working? But I also see it as a verb. Freeing time is a skill. And the skill behind it is systems thinking. A lot of systems books are incredibly boring. I mean, your community is all about biohacking and systems thinking and tips, tricks, hacks. And I think we've all learned so much from you over the years of what have you tried? What experiments have you run? What shortcuts have you discovered? Or as Shane Snow calls them, smart cuts, because
I like
they're
that.
not always short circuiting something. They're just the smarter route to get results. So for me, freeing time as a verb is continually asking. It's almost an agile development mantra. One of the mantras I live by is each time you repeat a task, take one step toward automating it. That if we can actually get out of the Sisyphean infinite loop of things like email and messaging and the day-to-day
Mm.
grind, then the steps that we do take, if we just do a little bit more work up front, we don't have to think about it ever again. And then we put this big, beautiful brain that we all have to work on the bigger problems, the more interesting work. So I'll give you the most simple example of this: toilet paper, paper towels. Like, this is a household thing that you could just put on subscription. Look at a cadence. How often do you need to order these things? Put it on subscription. And not only do you then get faster and better at ordering paper towels, it's that you never have to remember to do it again. And that's very simple, but that's the reason I share something like that, because if we can think at that level, then all of the systems we do put in place are just going to exponentially generate free time into the future.
So, I'm a computer science guy, and I admit that I had a problem with being an automation fetishist. I'm like, I hate doing things more than once. I am just going to automate everything. And pretty soon I realized I spent way more time managing my automation system than I spent actually doing stuff. So my home automation, it's this amazing technology that you don't have to change the batteries. You hit a freaking switch when you walk in the room, and it always works, and it's zero maintenance. And it feels like, oh, my credit card is going to run out on my subscription, and I'm going to get them when I'm on vacation, and I have too many, I don't have enough. So for that specific problem, like, I've got a thing for this. We have centralized facilities. We also have this thing in tech called caching, where a lot of the data people see, they don't know this, but you're not going back to Google to actually see something. You're going to pieces of Google's code that are sitting on other servers closer to you to make it faster. It's called content distribution. I was an exec at a company in that space. So I just cache. So I just buy a shitload of that stuff and throw it in a closet. And yes, I have space. I'm on a farm. I have almost infinite space. But then I think about it once a year, and I have to fix my subscription twice a year. Do you spend like half your time managing your automation, or did you automate the management of your automation? Like, how do you really not just get burdened by a bunch of subscriptions?
That'd be amazing to have create a bot that manages the automation for the house.
I want that.
See, I live in New York City, so I can't really cache. In New York City, you got to be real strategic about every inch of space.
You get 2 sheets of toilet paper. That's your cache.
You can't use toilet paper anymore. There's no room in the closet. So yeah, my husband jokes, he calls me the CTO because I'll just install tech around the house just for the joy of it.
Yep.
I know you were an early advisor for tonals. We have a tonal, we have a Peloton, we have all these things. And of course, Alexa's listening to everything. Well, systems, anything. Think about an old house. Every system, every organism is subject to entropy, which is just the slow descent into chaos. So, like anything, systems do need maintenance. Like, I don't know about you, but I love geeking out on Zapier. So, I set up Zaps, these really intricate Zaps that will handle a lot in the business so that no one on my team has to do busy work or minutia. So, if somebody registers for my community, there's a Zap that adds them to a recurring calendar invite. It adds them to our circle community. It subscribes them to the podcast. It puts them on my mailing list. So no one person has to do all that. But just like any website, any house, things break and they fall apart. And so I do think that it's important to check in at some interval. It doesn't have to be that often. What I like to do is, a lot of your listeners are probably using project management software of some kind if you work with a team. I will tag things, fix it. So as I notice things that are broken or out of date or just subject to that entropic descent, of just kind of starting to fall apart, we'll just tag it, fix it. And then I haven't been so good about this lately with writing and launching the book, but creating like a fix it sprint, either once a quarter or twice a year, where we just 2 days fix all the little stuff. The same thing in a house that you just don't really want to focus on every single day.
That's really smart. I think I should hire you to fix it.
Hashtag fix it. Yep. Just tag me. Just
Uh,
call
I,
Jenny. Hashtag fix it.
I may be guilty of that as an entrepreneur, but it's sort of like, all right, I don't ask how can we do it. I ask who can do it, with the assumption that they'll automate it because they're strategically lazy. Like, why would I do the same thing every day? That's boring. I'll automate it, and then I'll spend my time learning how to automate other stuff and learning and developing and figuring out something more valuable to do. And someone who's just happy to sit there and be like, every day, my job is to insert a hashtag here that could have been automated. You're like, maybe
Right.
you're not a good fit.
I
Like,
know. And then what's interesting is that, because I started blogging in 2005, taught myself how to code websites from scratch in a text file just for the fun of it. But there's now software and tools that exist now that didn't even exist a year ago or 2 years ago. So it's also interesting to try to keep up with, oh, a person used to have to do this, but now it's automated. Even transcription is a good example. You probably remember a time when you would just pay $1 a minute, and that's how you get a transcript for something like this podcast. Now there's software called Descript where you throw in the audio file, and within 2 minutes, it can detect speakers. It can transcribe the audio pretty well. And they have a find and replace for filler words that within 2 minutes, you just do find and replace. It might find 100 ums and remove them from the audio itself, not just the written transcript. So something like that is
wow.
incredible. What's possible now that just, I mean, that's what's so exciting about tech and innovation, but that sometimes people in their role at the company get used to doing something and they don't even realize that software has evolved or that there's now new services. SaaS, of course, is such a growing industry to do that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
It's funny. Chris is my technical engineer for the show, and he's done audiobook sound engineering. Because, guys, I actually think it matters that the show sounds really good, so you'll want to keep listening, and it just doesn't subtly itch to hear it. And so I invest a lot in audio. And he's hearing this right now, and he's going, "This means I don't have to do my job, and I'll just sit here. And Dave's going to pay me, and I'll do some videos instead for him." And so there you go, Chris. We just did your job for you. So let's find something more fun to do. Just kidding.
Well,
Keep doing what you do.
Chris is amazing. I can vouch for Chris. What's interesting is it would get Chris out of the weeds of having to listen for every single He could just do a find and replace and make us sound way more brilliant than we even are. you know. And so Chris can do what Chris is uniquely skilled and talented to do. So I like this exercise. I tell my team, I don't want you to hate your work. I don't want you to feel drained and bored by your job. And if you do, tell me. I don't take it personally. I think of it as a systems problem. So how can we work together to automate or get this off your plate or subcontract, whatever? But I also think I call it the Fiji test. I want every single person on the team to try to make themselves replaceable every day. And the reason I call it the Fiji test is because I kept envisioning what would happen if I got hit by a bus. And that was just so grim that I decided, what would happen if I got whisked to Fiji for 3 weeks with no devices and no ability to even tell my team? Could somebody step in? Could the business stay afloat? Could it be okay? And not just me, the owner, can anyone on my team get whisked to Fiji? And we step in, or someone outside of the business who knows nothing about what we do can step in and fill in for them. And I think that just helps with engagement, with creative thinking, with onboarding and with turnover, which is inevitable. Someone's going to leave, and you don't want them to leave with all your best IP about how to run the business with them.
It makes a lot of sense. I run that question myself. What happens if I get hit by a bus and I know that the bus is going to wrap itself around me and just kind of bifurcate into two and I'll just keep walking? But I know that's not the case for everyone. So we do that regularly with my senior leaders. It's like, okay, are there people in the company where like we would die as a company if we didn't? And in that case, maybe we need to have a second doing that role because they're mission critical. And it turns out there aren't that many mission critical roles in companies. A lot of times we think there are, but there aren't. And if automation increases quality of life for employees, that's the way to do it. And you talk in your book about how time is not money, time is life force. Tell me why you think it's life force, because I don't know if I agree with you, but I want to hear your point of view.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear your take on this. Benjamin Franklin is the originator of that line, time is money. And it's so perfectly capitalist because, well, time is money. So we all need to work. And here in America, I know you're in Canada, but in maybe North America, but particularly the US, we're kind of obsessed with work and work defining us.
Oh, yeah.
And like, it's who we are. It's what we do. It's what we talk about. And I love my work. So there's that. But money is, well, it depends how you think about money. We have tremendous inequality in society. But on some level, you can generate more money. And money is asymmetric. You can have hockey stick growth. You can usually, especially someone like you, Dave, and your listeners, can figure out how to make more money. And time is just so different. So time is not money. Money is infinite on some level. Money can be abundant. Money can be a creative thought exercise. Money can be problem solving. It is figure outable. But time isn't. Some would say time is nonlinear, but time is ticking and it's finite. It's not necessarily a renewable resource. Energy is renewable within the time that we have. So the reason I say time is not money, time is life force, is that I think time is far more precious than money, and that we should be far more considerate with how we're spending our time, who we want to spend it with, how present we are when we are choosing our activities and the people that we're with. And so, yeah, I think just time is way more precious than money. Time is life force. Time is, if we really want to get existential with it. So I'm curious to hear your take.
Well, there's kind of two aspects to it, but the biggest one is that in my mind, the energy that you produce and the energy that you have is life force. Because if you're out of energy, and as a former 300-pound guy with brain fog, if I had free time, it was for sleeping, and it wasn't valuable time because I didn't have the energy to use the time. So if you have enough energy, you can make more time and you can make more money. But if you don't have energy, and if you don't have energy, you'll spend all your money to get it back, which is pretty much what I did. So like you got to have the energy, and then you've got to have freedom and space, which involves time, right? And I used to believe that money equals freedom. So I'm 26 years old. I make $6 million. I'm like, woohoo. And I was busier than ever, and I didn't increase my happiness really or my freedom, but I could buy cool sunglasses. And then I lost the $6 million, and I was equally unhappy as I was when I had it. I'm like, money isn't it, but time is so precious. And I just never took time off because I was too busy working to have money to have freedom. And it seems like a lot of people are doing that now, the gig economy, and, drive for Uber after you finish your job and you got to get ahead. What do you say about time management if you're still building your career?
Yeah, it's so powerful to hear your story as you were telling it. I mean, of course, I think a lot of us could say that at least money can solve some problems. I mean,
Hell
because
yeah.
it doesn't give you everything, but there's a lot that money can do. And not once you get your basic needs met, money can do a lot of good. You can support family members who need it. You can support people in the community and society. You can build things. I mean, money is really helpful to have. As you said, if you have money and no energy and no life force, you're going to be miserable. So sometimes I think we pursue money, or we pursue career success and accolades, and we, startup companies pursue venture funding, and then it becomes this devil's bargain in a way of all of a sudden it's not the creative building process that they love. The money has corrupted something essential in the process. Not always, but that it can. And so I just want us to ask the question, what if money isn't everything? And how I actually don't think that money and time have to be opposed to each other. in a zero sum way. So I'm always asking, you mentioned when I worked at Google and I was so afraid to leave. I was just so afraid to
Oh,
walk away
yeah.
from a six-figure salary in my mid 20s and also the cachet of Google, the big fancy brand. I was worried no one would want to be my friend anymore if I left because I used to host authors to come speak at Google.
Well,
And so it's,
there's always Facebook, which is like
oh
MySpace
my God.
2.0 at this point. But maybe they would have been your friend.
Right, right. Oh God. Well, so I started to ask, instead of what if I go broke, I started to ask, how can I earn twice as much in half the time?
There you go.
And then later I tacked on with joy and ease because I realized twice as much in half the time still wasn't it, with joy and ease, and then later while serving the highest good. So I'm asking not should I choose money or time? And by the way, I think autonomy, you mentioned that as energy. Energy is so crucial, but also autonomy. Because I think we want, on some level, human beings, this is why I loved your episode on freedom. We want to feel a sense of autonomy, just that we can choose, that we have enough money, we have our basic needs met, but autonomy over our time, autonomy over how we spend our time. And so that's what I'm always asking, almost as a creative inquiry, is how can I generate abundant time, money, and energy? Or what can I do that's at that intersection of revenue, ease, and joy? And then I feel that's where the really interesting ideas happen.
My friend Joe Polish runs the Genius Network, and I've been a member for a long time. And he teaches a thing called ELF, easy, lucrative, and fun. And if it's not
Oh,
that, maybe it's not what you want to be doing with the majority of your time. And people say, yeah, Dave, you're some kind of privileged guy. Guys, I put auto parts in boxes for 5 years to help pay for my college. I also sold the first thing ever sold over the internet to try and not put auto parts in boxes. And I scooped ice cream at Baskin Robbins. So those are all zero autonomy, intellectually boring, horrific jobs. So I'm highly motivated to not do that, right? But same time, everyone at every level, if that's your goal, I've got to make what I do at work, even if it's not intellectually challenging because you didn't want it to be, but at least you have an element of fun in it and some degree of flexibility, whether it's after you get off work or with what you do during work. But how realistic is that? I mean, half the people in the United States right now have negative net worth. Literally, if they paid off what they owe, they have less than zero. How do you go from there to I'm having fun when I work? Oh, and I have enough.
yeah. I mean, it's so tough and it can be so despairing. There's an incredible book called Scarcity on the way that our brain changes when we do have scarcity, that actually when we don't have enough resources, it gives us a sort of tunnel vision, and it actually is harder to think creatively and have more energy, and a lot of our energy is getting sapped by stress. So I mean, I was so lucky, like relatively speaking, with the pandemic, but it did wipe out 80% of my income in 2 weeks for 2 years out into the future. And I could feel that sense of narrowing, of that tunnel vision of stress. And at that point, it's no longer, oh, yeah, like what should I do for fun? It's what do you do when your back is up against the wall? I do think that we can expand our definition of fun and easy. What do these things mean? Yeah, it's not just for privileged people that have already, quote, made it. What I find so fascinating is what one person thinks is fun, another person is just, it's their nightmare. And then my dad was used to bag groceries. He also used to be a songwriter, still is. And he has a song called Bagging Groceries for the FBI. But that when he was bagging groceries, he would think about Zorba the Greek and he would try, and he was in the army and he would be cutting potatoes or on patrol in the military. And he just said that he always tried to find the joy in what he was doing, whether it was bagging groceries or cutting potatoes. And that for his upbringing was so chaotic that he said every day since he turned 18 and was out of the house, didn't matter if it was basic training in the army, every day felt like heaven, like a vacation. But I just think looking at the work that we find fun that comes easily to us truly might be something other people dread. But then we do it with so much less friction and so much more flow. So that's how I think of fun, is like what puts you in the zone where you actually do your best work that does create disproportionate value in the world, that will help you climb out of that hole where you feel despair because you don't have anything and you need to bounce back like you've done.
I like that you talk about friction versus flow. One of the design ethics behind what I do, all the advice that I give, It's like, what's the least friction? Because we can tell you, oh, every morning, here's a list of 72 things you can do to be, a perfect biohacker. And no one's going to do it because the friction's too high. And even at Upgrade Labs, on my franchise, okay, how do I make it so it doesn't suck to come in and you get so much done that the equation saying, well, I had to drive there, but once I got there, I just did everything and I never sweated and I got measurable, quantifiable results. Lowest friction experience possible is my goal because I hate friction. I think everyone does. And when there's no friction, it is flow. What is your specific process though? And you write about it in the book. I've gotten that far through it. You just gave me your book like yesterday.
I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed.
But you talk about what to do when there's too much friction. What's your process, your recipe for that?
Yeah, well, here we are geeking out about systems and automation, and even for you, biohacking. And I think a question a lot of people have is, where should I start? Or I'm so overwhelmed. There's so much to do. Or I'm not a systems thinker, or this stuff makes me cringe, whatever someone's thinking. And so the primary diagnostic that I look at is, where are you in friction and where are you in flow? And we know friction, whether it's friction about your diet, friction with your energy, friction is tension. You feel drained, dread, you're procrastinating. Things just feel so much harder than they need to be. And then flow is that state of effortlessness. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi describes it as almost ecstatic bliss. Time is passing and you don't even realize it. And so much of what you do, I know, Dave, is like helping us find a flow state, and a flow state with our entire being and our entire mind, body, spirit system. And we know, and research shows, McKinsey research shows that executives are 5 times more productive when they're in a flow state. And I think we all have a visceral experience of that. So if you just notice, and you're only as strong as your weakest link, these kind of things that sound cliche, but it's true. If you look at where in your life, whether it's work, it's at home, it's with health and fitness, where is there the most friction? That, I think, is the biggest opportunity to move toward flow. So I say, look for a friction area. Maybe you want to start really small. And then in the book, I talk about the free time framework. So align, design, assign. That first you want to align that area or realign it. What is important to you? What values does it connect to? What strengths can you leverage? Is your energy aligned? Sometimes we are doing things as legacy that we shouldn't be doing anymore. And, I quote this other author in the book. He says, "Are you ordering off yesterday's menu?" Which I just think is so powerful. Like, where in our lives are we just ordering off of yesterday's menu? We're not even seeing what's right in front of us today. So then only once you've aligned it with your energy and who you are, which I think a lot of systems and optimizations books, a lot of them miss, especially in the business realm, is always about optimizing, but it's not actually saying, does this person align with your energy and your vision and your goals? And so then design is kind of the optimization, and assign is on purpose. As you said at the start, how can we get this off our plate? Who can help step in at that point?
All right, I'm going to go back to earlier in my career. So I used to put all of my energy into the things that were highest friction for me because I didn't want to be weak at any area. And I realized after some epiphanies that the things I suck at are hardest for me. So I would put all my energy into those. So I didn't know about your process because I could have aligned better there for like, do the stuff you're good at. And then design, okay, what do I want the future state to look like? What's it going to do for others, et cetera. But then you talk about assign. And under your assign thing, you have 3 things you assign. What are those 3 things?
Well, assign, figure out who, what, when, who will do what by when. And also you can assign to technology. So you can assign figuring out the weather to Alexa. I mean, that's a really tiny example. But the reason I have assign as part of the framework is that I think a lot of us resist. So I talk about the 4 horsemen of the business ambition apocalypse. Money, power, and fame, we know can be hungry ghosts, we're aware. But I think that a lot of business owners, the 4th vice is control. And we want to keep control and micromanage, or, oh, I can do it faster myself. So the reason there's a whole part of the framework on assign is to challenge all of us to say, once we design a process and we design the ideal outcomes and the ideal impact, and that vision is crystal clear, now the challenge is, how can you continually double how much you delegate? What is edgy for you to get rid of? And if it's on the home front, it could be as simple as somebody to come clean the house. But in terms of work, and I know if you're at the entry level, you have probably less ability to delegate than somebody who's further along in their career. But it's still a good thought exercise because, again, you can delegate to technology, you can delegate to a system, to a process, but to think about what if it wasn't just me here? And because that's not really sustainable. And that's where we do become the bottleneck and the single point of failure is when we hoard and we keep too much on our plate. And that is what leads to burnout.
When I give talks to young entrepreneurs, I literally will say, all right, poll in the room. How many people wash their own socks? And like half the hands go up. And like, you're terrible entrepreneurs. And you just stop right now. Because I promise you that if you ask for help washing your socks and doing your laundry, you can take that hour that you saved and do something with your business. And if you can't make more from your business than it takes to pay someone to wash your socks, then you either started your business yesterday or it's not working. And that's just a very simple example of assigning. But talk to me about to-do lists. Do you organize your life by lists?
I do. I do have lists. I mean, so I was telling you before we hit record, I run my entire business on Notion. It's this incredible software that's almost overwhelming for how customizable it is. It's almost no code software where you can create an entire intranet for your business or your mind and externalize your mind. Get it? I think I take a page out of David Allen's book is that your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. So I do like to have to-dos. I do them in a Moleskine notebook as well. So I'm not only digital. I just had a podcast episode, a listener submission, Liran, she lives in Israel. She has a mess page. So I like that too. I like that outside of a neatly ordered to-do list, I also like the idea and have a bunch of these of just mess pages or an inbox where all the ideas, all the little tasks go. And then later you can just in a big batch kind of sort and filter them. So, yeah, I have a little bit of everything to answer your question. How about you?
Well, I went through about 4 years of getting things done, which is David Allen's organization framework. And I realized in my heart, I think David Allen needs some trauma therapy because the system is based on someone who is so afraid of missing something that he's willing to spend an inordinate amount of time putting everything in a list, everything in a filing cabinet. I had filing cabinets up to the ceiling, folders all over my email. And one day I said, I'm spending half my time making sure that I don't miss anything. What if I just realized that my email had a search function and I never filed a thing again? And that's what I do today. And when I have lists, they create chronic stress. So what I do now is I am time-based. If I'm deciding to do something, I open my calendar. And then I say, this is when I'm going to do it. Or I open my email or a messaging system, whatever, and I say, hey, team member, please do this. And there is no list. And it creates a huge amount of freedom because it's cognitive freedom. It's not just free time. It's that I don't have these like stacks of honeydew lists. And everyone knows if you have a list, the bottom half of the list is never going to get done. And most people put their health in the bottom of their list. It's on, yeah, I should exercise. Like, yeah, when are you going to do it? Put it on your calendar, right? And better yet, have an accountability partner for it. So I completely abolished lists and I learned I might miss something. And I just said, I'm going to do my own trauma work with neurofeedback around FOMO. Yeah, I might miss something. I'm not even going to name the exceptionally top rapper in the world whose people reached out and said, he wants to do a diet book with you. And I didn't see it for like 3 months. Oops. Right? But it's okay, right? It happens. And I think Tim Ferriss was really good at that too. He finally said, I'm not going to answer my emails because there's too many. So I have help answering my emails. I do my best. Sometimes I answer text, sometimes I don't. But everyone else I know is like that too, but they feel guilty.
Oh, the guilt, the micro
I don't.
guilt. Yes. Well, what I'm hearing you describe is more of a flowing relationship to your work, that you're not as rigid and following all these rules, and that in fact had a diminishing return of your time and attention, and it actually created more stress. So I love how you're working is more flowing with your time and your calendar, and that you're in a way you reached a point where you trust yourself to know what's important. I think sometimes writing something down is helpful if it's keeping you up at night and you just got to get it out of your head. But like similar to what you just described, I stopped having goals. Like, and I know that's kind of shocking to say to a biohacking, the father of biohacking. my life became so much happier when I dropped a lot of my professional and business goals. And the crazy thing is that amazing things still continued happening. So, like when my last book, Pivot, came out in 2016, I said I was going to market it with serendipity and magic.
There you go.
And I didn't really set goals. I mean, I have a goal with free time to free 50 million hours. Like, I want the book and the podcast to reach as many people as that. I just envision setting 50 million hours free. So that's like a big mission.
Isn't that just your ego?
I guess so. I kind of get happy thinking about like, okay, what's possible in the world if I helped you, Dave, free up 5 hours a week? Like, oh my God, you're going to solve nuclear physics. Like I don't know, you're going to
Look how excited you are. I totally called you out on an ego thing, and you're like laughing and getting more excited. Like, you have weird wiring in there. That's awesome, by the way.
Well,
Like, I'm complimenting you. I'm like, wow, look at you. But I like what you're saying. It feels good. You're like, wow, I'm the same way. Like, I don't have a set number of pounds I want people to lose, but I know it's way more than 1 million. And I just,
right.
I know that I'm never going to know for sure. And I started my whole blog with, if 5 people read this and don't go through all the shit that I went through, I have the ROI on the thousands of hours of work. It's paid for. It's done.
Yes. And I do think that it's less about my ego. Like, oh, I want Jenny Blake. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'll come to a conference. You mentioned we met at TED, and it's like, sometimes I'll have imposter syndrome, or I'll think, well, if I sell 1 million books, then people want to talk to me instead of the other way around.
I noticed you didn't really make the cut for dinner. I thought you were like the charity.
I know, I snuck in. I was the seat filler. I was the last minute seat filler. And the thing is, sometimes I'll feel bad that, oh, let's say, Dave, I met you in the elevator and I go, I wish I had something to offer you. You know, like, you've been so generous sharing your platform in this podcast with me. And so sometimes I will say the ego part of it is that I just do want to reach a level where I can do what you do for so many other people.
So the not giving back enough kind of syndrome?
The other, well, I don't know. The other thing I'll say just real quick on the goalless thing, I didn't come to this conference saying like, oh, I have this goal to meet Dave Asprey, or like to do X, Y, Z.
And yet there's a lot bigger people there. I mean,
no, I'll take meeting you 10 over 10 over meeting Bill Gates. So.
Well, thank you.
But it's like, I didn't need to set a goal in order for something awesome to happen. And I just think that there's like so much obsession in the business world of goal setting, and that's great. And some people do really well with it. And I did all kinds of goal setting in my early 20s, and it definitely all transpired and then some. But I also think that life can be so surprising and delightful. And I like the element of surprise, I guess, and serendipity.
My primary goal these days is just to use my time for the highest good. And that's it. Right. And I don't have to be the person who defines highest good. I'm not saying who is defining it, but whatever it is, it seems, when I allow, which is that kind of friction versus flow, when you have allowing, it works. And you talked about stuff that keeps you up at night. I'll just say it. If anything keeps you up at night, you haven't done enough work on yourself. There aren't things that keep me up at night. That you go to sleep, right? And if there's something in there, that's just your body trying to keep you alive from some threat that's not a real threat. So your lens on reality needs an upgrade. And that's why one of my companies does a lot of work on cognitive stuff and EEG, because you can figure that stuff out. So how many nights per week do you have something that keeps you up with all the systems you have in place?
I don't have too many. I think
I wouldn't predict it. You seem pretty chill, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I also run my business with a lot of intuition. So sometimes people say, oh, you need to, it's the data. Data is everything, and only look at the data. But I actually think, what is intuition? It's actually 1,000 or 1,000,000 data points that is just operating in our subconscious. Sometimes my intuition will kick in and I will lose sleep over a decision I need to make, or red flags that I suddenly have almost an aha moment right before my head hits the pillow, or I fall asleep, where I go, oh, I need to do something about that. Or, oh, it's that pattern recognition of, I might need to back out of this group I just joined, or shift this relationship, or drop this client, or something that might have certain consequences, but that I get that instinct. So those are the kinds of things that would kind of keep me up or jolt me awake. It's more of like an insider intuitive hit. Like, ooh, I got to take action on this.
Got it. I do get some of those. I wouldn't say they keep me awake, but sometimes, oh yeah, I just, dreamed a solution to the problem. I'm going to write it down.
That's the best.
Yeah,
That's the best. If you're like,
those
oh,
are
thank
very
you,
cool.
mind. You just worked in my dreams. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for doing the work
Yes.
for me. I automated that. Right.
Yes.
You do something else though that seems kind of unachievable. 2 hour wind up and a 2 hour wind down on either end of your day. How does that work?
Yes. See, my logic here is that for those of us who are in creative or leadership roles, or you run your own business, I run a very tiny business, that our brain and our energy is so vital to everything else going well. So, yeah, my 2 hour windup is coffee, bulletproof, of course, and now it's going to be danger. Now I'm so
Oh,
happy that
thanks.
got to try that here. But yeah, I read. I feed my mind in the morning. I love to read nonfiction. I love to kind of warm up my mind, and so coffee, reading. And then I don't check email. I certainly don't check first when I wake up. I don't even check until closer to 10 or 11 a.m. because I don't want to know. That time is for me, and that's when I'm at my creative best. So I want
Mhm.
to work on my biggest projects and problems at that time. And then I work 5 very focused hours. So I'll work from 10 to 2 or 11 to 3. And I don't take breaks. I don't go on social media. I don't procrastinate in that window. I just get it done. By 3, my brain is mush. As one of my clients said to me, I don't even know my own name. So it's kind of pointless for me to work after 3 p.m. So yeah, I will exercise. I'll do a Peloton ride or yoga or take my dog out for a walk. And then I'll make dinner. And then I spend time with my husband. So everything that happens after 3 p.m. is very important to me in my life. And I think I could work twice as much as I do and be good at email, but instead I choose to be bad at email and unresponsive and spend that time with the things that really do nourish me.
It's It's interesting. I had more of that until I had kids, and then there was
Hmm.
like a 7 or 8 year period, like 2 hours of free time, whatever. And what I ended up is I don't do meetings before 10, and I don't check
Yes.
messages until right before then. If I even if maybe I check them during my first meeting, depending on the meeting. And then I stop my work day around 5:30 because I want to have an early dinner because that makes you sleep better. So then you have more energy the next day. And then after that, it's, family time, relationship time, and some reading or whatever. But I found that injecting kids subtracted huge amounts of time. And I'm guessing
Absolutely.
you don't have kids?
No, and 100% the parents that I know, especially with young children, especially those who just navigated these last few years of homeschooling, oh, it's a completely different relationship to time, energy, and attention. It sounds like it's a gauntlet.
What that means for parents, though, is that automation is 10 times more important.
Yeah, and delegation. Yeah, getting help. And I don't have to tell you that because you've lived it. I mean, I'm curious, Dave. I mean, you've probably talked about this a lot, but sometimes I think when you're doing all that and you're raising kids, yeah, it's no longer just about like time optimization and freedom. You have this mission. You're raising 2 tiny humans, and it's almost like some of the other things go into survival mode a little bit. Um, I don't know. It just seems like a phase of life that is so intense, and almost no one can totally prepare you for it.
People all tried to warn me. And when my first child was born, I'm like, I get 6 weeks of paternity leave. I'll take a consulting gig during that because that's so much free time. And I just didn't understand the energy drain and the lack of sleep and all that. And I felt bad. I called the guy up. I'm like, yeah, I know I was going to design your fundraising deck for your data center power management company, but I'm not going to do it. I'm like, I simply don't have the mental abilities right now. It was crazy. But now I realize that it's interrupted time. The younger they are, the more interruptions there are. So you think you have 10 minutes, but you really had 6 minutes. And that means, well, if you don't automate, you don't get the little things out of the way, they will eat you alive. And so it drives efficiency or it drives chaos. So you have to become more effective as a human being. So I'm more conscious of a lot of things because it's like going to boot camp. There's stress conditioning that happens. And that's part of being a parent, especially if you're in a house where both parents work, which is the norm these days. It's like, man, you come home, did you want to pick up the toilet paper? Or did you want to automate it? And the answer was spend a little time automating, even if it's midnight time when you're tired, because you know you're going to get that time back later. The other thing that you kind of touch on in the book is quality time. And as a parent, like, okay, I could measure the amount of hours I spend with the kids, but if it's, making them do their chores, it's actually not really good time. So what I did is I automated making them do their chores with shock collars. And then when that time is done, it's like, how much time do we have where I'm spending one-on-one time with one of my kids? And let's schedule on a calendar where it's a dinner. So it turns out that I've benefited from scheduling quality time, not just with kids, but quality time for myself. Oh, I'm going to plan ahead. I'm going to get a massage on this day, or I'm going to do whatever it is. I'm going to plan this biohack at this time, because otherwise something else will always eat it up. So how do you go about protecting your free time from just being swallowed by life?
Oh yeah, I know. And apps and like our phones are designed to be like slot machines in our pocket. It was Nur Ayal, by the way, who in his book on Indistractable, maybe you've had him on the
Yeah,
show, but
he's been on the show. Yeah.
yeah, he talked about how he and his kid have this little wish, like suggestion bucket that they put ideas in a jar of what they could do together. And then when it's time for their quality time, they pick something out of the hat, basically. I think that's such a great idea of just having this little wishing jar where you have all those kind of activities. I also hear a lot of parents say they become incredibly discerning. They're like, I didn't know what prioritization was before I had kids. And then they just get absolutely unapologetic about saying no. And I'm curious, I mean, I'd be curious maybe for the next part of the conversation, but your relationship to saying no, because it's an interesting paradox of success is that the more success that you have and the more things are working and the more recognition, actually, the more overwhelmed you could get. And the more that the systems that might have worked at the previous level are going to break once you cross that next threshold of awareness and attention and success. And so I think it's interesting as well looking at people who have to continually transcend their approach, because it's almost like the punishment for success is now you're going to have even more good opportunities and you can't possibly do them all. And the FOMO is going to be 10x what it was prior. So I think protecting your time is also knowing, another F for you is focus. So I think freedom, yes, and focus. I think so many of us desperately crave focus and focus time, what Cal Newport calls deep work. And so for me, when it comes to protecting my time, I like to know, what am I focused on? And I said I don't have goals, but I'll have one big focus, like write the book or launch the podcast that comes above so many other things, not my health and not my relationships, at least the close ones. And I do think that there is a process of being very disciplined and trying to drop the guilt around saying no to everything else.
There's a book called The Road Less Stupid.
Yes, so good.
Yeah. Who's
So
the author? It's
Keith Cunningham, I think.
Thank you. It's Keith Cunningham. I've met him
So
and I'm like,
good.
what's his name? What's his name? And he's been a chairman and a founder of multiple companies. And he's like, an hour a day, he has a special chair. This is thinking chair. He's like, I just make sure I have a special notebook. And that's where my thinking works, kind of like Cal Newport's deep work. I don't know that I'm that disciplined on that, but I do have times, usually on airplanes or something, where like I got nothing else. I'm just going to think for a little while and good stuff happens. So there's something to be said for that approach. And just saying no. One thing is learning how to scale. So you joined Google at 6,000 people and there were what, 20,000 when you left? 36,000. So early in my career, I was at the company that held Google's first servers when it was 2 guys and 2 computers. I was a co-founder of a part of that company. And we grew from 300 employees to 5,000 employees in 3 years. And that was whatever, 12, 13x, just craziness. And that taught me a lot about scaling. Plus, I designed systems that scale in tech, like N+1 horizontal scalability with load balancing and session state management for the nerds who are here. But what that meant was that I could apply those things to companies. And I've grown one company, Bulletproof, to north of 100 million in revenue. And yeah, systems change probably 5 times. And oftentimes the people who manage the systems evolve and change and grow, and you add new people and people outgrow their ability to do that scale. So there was a lot of like learning to let go, learning to trust. And now it's how do you design a redundant array of inexpensive companies. So I have 6 or 7 companies in my portfolio. I'm focused a lot on Upgrade Labs, on Danger Coffee. And Upgrade Labs is growing really well. It's a franchise model that can scale literally to hundreds of locations in a couple of years because there's lots of people and they're all investing individually in their own businesses. And by the way, own in upgradelabs.com if you want to know more about that. But to design, my own team to be able to do that, that's taken a lot of work. And my biggest challenge is, I have more ideas than I have people or time, or frankly, or money. So I've asked my team, and I do this almost every week, I'm going to give you the idea, but just because I'm the CEO doesn't mean we're going to actually do it. And you're accountable for whether we decide to do it. And that means we have a not no, but not now list. Well, that's a great idea. Maybe someday. And you just kind of put it on that list so you don't feel like you're getting FOMO because you might do it, but you don't have to do it because you thought of it. And that's been really helpful, but I still work on that regularly. I've had board members sit down and say, Dave, you're breaking everyone. Maybe you don't need 200 SKUs at a $40 million revenue company. I'm like, oh, maybe I don't. So we killed a bunch of products that were great products, but we couldn't put marketing resources to educate people on what they should use them.
There's a book Gino Wickman wrote, Traction, of course, super popular, EOS, but Rocket Fuel is so interesting that a lot of companies have a visionary that's full of ideas like you, and then they need to have an integrator or COO or a team who can step in and just say, no, we cannot chase every brilliant idea right now. And even what you described with the line of SKUs, it's almost like a rose bush. Like you have to sometimes trim the ones that are good, but not the hits. Well, I wanted to ask you, just going back to this subject of systems and scaling, I think it's so interesting how you've done that at so many different levels, and you've done it in very technical companies and with very technical systems. I am so curious about when Bulletproof and all of that was just starting to go mainstream and biohacking, but when you really became known, let's say of one to many, like among the people, all of us who are here listening, and it wasn't just your corporate scaling and success, but actually people who would recognize you. I saw it happen here at TED of people coming up to you and saying thank you and oh my goodness, and it's Dave Asprey and freaking out. So were there times where you got overwhelmed by that, or where you had FOMO of that actually so many opportunities are coming your way? And it's almost like what Bill Hewlett talks about of companies dying of indigestion, but just that indigestion of all the opportunity and attention coming your way. Like, I'm just so curious how you navigated that.
It can be really difficult because a lot of people are saying, I want to be famous because then I'll be happy. When I was 23, I sold the first thing ever sold over the internet before e-commerce had been named e-commerce, and it was before the browser was invented. And I sold a t-shirt that said caffeine, my drug of choice, to 14 countries out of my dorm room. And I was an Entrepreneur magazine. There's this no, guys, I really was fat. Here's a picture that was printed of me, before digital cameras. And I'm in a double extra large t-shirt. And so I had my fame. I'm like, this is amazing. My life's going to change. And I'm like, okay, so I was in 80 or something publications, but nothing really changed. I got a few phone calls. And it was like, that didn't really do what I thought it was going to do. So before I started Bulletproof, I am a computer hacker. I had pretty much erased my digital identity. You couldn't tell where I lived. I was happy to be anonymous. And I just realized in order to help the number of people that I wanted to help, I had to be a public person. So I do it because it's worth it, but I don't do it because, oh, look at me. So that wasn't a problem. What became a problem, though, is when you have, 10 speaking opportunities, and you could probably go to 7 of them if you stack your calendar. I happily did that for the first 5 years of the company because screw social media. Getting followers is nothing. Get on a stage, show people you're real, give them something really valuable, some knowledge, something they haven't heard before. And then when they follow you on social media, they actually know that you're legit versus some Instagram filter or whatever. And that made a big difference. So for me, it's like a flow state. In fact, public speaking is a common way of getting flow state. So I'm like, look, I'm helping all these people, but it's not about me. It's about, I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. So I'm happy to do this. So that's more of like a joyful getting energy thing for me. But if I had stage fright and it was a chore, it would have totally burned me out. But as it wasn't, like, I'm just doing what I'm here to do. So I think it comes down to temperament and mission for that. And if you get the ego power addiction thing, it's exceptionally common. So I'm also very fortunate. I've had a good number of famous musicians, actors, actresses reach out, and I get to ask them about fame and like how they deal with it. And one of my favorite experiences ever, because it was so ironic and funny, is Brendan Routh has been on the show. He's a friend. He wrote a foreword for my books, and he was Superman in 2006, and he's the Atom, or he was the Atom in Legends of Tomorrow, and he's had a series of like great acting roles. So I'm flying up to Vancouver with him, where they film a lot of stuff in the studios up here, and we get off the airplane at 2 a.m. He goes, watch the paparazzi. So he like shows me, he's like, that guy's real, and he signs stuff for him. He goes, that guy's going to sell my signature. I'm not signing anything. And we go out to breakfast the next morning at the Fairmont. And we're sitting there, and these two guys walk up like all excited and like, oh, I can't believe you're here. And he's about to stand up and like, Dave, we love you. Like, I'm sitting with Superman, and Brandon, he's such a gentleman. Like, he's the guy who really should play Superman just because of his personality. But he's sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is awesome. It's not me. I don't have to do it. But I'm not Superman, and I don't even do it for that. But to be able to receive, I actually did work with a therapist on being able to receive like gratitude from others, because I wasn't doing that. So there's a lot of weird stuff versus I adore you and I don't know why, versus I actually lost 100 pounds and I just want to tell you thanks. And like, it feels really different to me, and I don't care about adoration. So I think anyone who's in that, oh my God, I'm in the public eye for the first time, get advice from someone else in the public eye and get a really good therapist who's worked with famous people, because fame will fuck you up otherwise.
Mm. I know. It seems like, humans that there's another F, so many Fs, but it's almost like a negative F in terms of we're not really equipped for that. Was it on your podcast? I mean, were you talking about how, yes, I think you were, that we're not equipped to have that much attention and from so far distributed. And then I was talking to a Hollywood agent at South by Southwest, and he was saying, the problem now is not that celebrities, the ones he works with, it's not that they don't want somebody to come up and say thank you for their work and be genuine and have a genuine connection, but that they come up with their phone and they act like this person is just an animal in a cage. Like, oh, can I take a picture of you, or can I take a selfie with you? And it's so transactional. And that I won't repeat the actor's name, but that one very well-known actor, beloved, he will say, no, you can't take a photo, but what's your name? And that the actor will just ask and create a connection, and he's happy to talk to this person, but he's not there to just give them a souvenir that they just take and run with. So I don't know, that's like a tangent on all of this, but I just think it's interesting to think about as individuals how we connect to other people in society. And I live in New York City, and yeah, sometimes you do see famous people walking down the street, and it's just, they're people too. So how do we want to treat them?
Yep. I would say treat them the way you'd like to be treated, and it usually works pretty well. But it's not something that a lot of entrepreneurs deal with unless they just are fortunate enough to hit the right level of success. But the most successful and most powerful and most wealthy people are anonymous for a reason, because it's a luxury. It's a big luxury. And that goes back to free time, right? There are people who can't go out to dinner because they collect a crowd. There's a private terminal at LAX where for only like, I think $8,000, you can have your airplane land, and they have like guards and armor plated doors and private rooms you can wait in, because you can't fly on a public plane. It just creates too much of that's not freedom. That's not free time. That's cost and planning and burden. And of course they have teams who do all that stuff for them. So, but I had a chance to fly through that one time because they were asked to stock Bulletproof coffee when it first came out, when I was working with Bulletproof. So like they gave me a free flight. I'm like, okay, I feel like a high roller now. There's a BMW driving you out to the airplane, and like, whoa, that's not my world. But the fact that it exists is part of what you're talking about. So I would just advise entrepreneurs who are saying, I want to be famous. Why? If it's not part of building your mission, your company, don't look at that. Look at having people who love you and really care about you in an inner circle who will support you, and entrepreneurs who've already done what you've done, who are your friends. So they'll tell you when you're doing stupid stuff that you can't see yet. That's way better than being famous.
Yes, I call those friend tours. Like
Yeah.
that it's not, I think sometimes people become obsessed with finding a mentor or somebody who's so successful. And the worst question of all time, can I pick your brain? No, you cannot get out of there. You cannot pick my brain. But friend tours are people who are at our level who we can have a mutual exchange of value. My latest theory that I'll record an episode on at some point is people who, we all know about like toxic people for the F in the friend category. I think about people who act like they're at a buffet and people who are at a potluck. So if they're at a buffet, they're looking in a conference or in a room going, what can I take from every single person here? Just walk up, take, 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 take. What can you teach me? Who can you connect me to? And then at a potluck, it's the person who's going, what can I bring? What can I give? Which is what you did with me. You just were like, oh, your book just came out. Oh, would love to have you on the show. Oh, would love to move things around for someone you don't even know. And it's just beyond generous and completely unexpected. And to me, it's very moving to have people who have the potluck energy. It's kind of a weird way to say it, but that generosity of spirit without such a transactional
Well,
thing. It's just refreshing.
we're both authors, and people who haven't written a book won't understand that it takes many thousands of hours to write a book. The hourly rate that we make as authors, even I'm a pretty successful one, is probably about $24 an hour. I think I figured it out once. Right. So you don't do it for money. You do it because you have an idea that's so valuable and important. You're willing to pour that much time into it, and hope that it at least pays for itself. And my books, I'm working on my 5th New York Times bestseller right now. It hasn't been out. It's not published yet, but I'm just predicting the future. And now, every one of those has been a labor of love. So you do that, and it just came out right when we released this podcast a couple of weeks before. So that means if more people see it earlier, it actually matters. And the ROI in terms of ripple effect, if a couple thousand people from this episode are like, oh, I'm going to read Free Time, and then they share this and their lives improve, it's actually a really good use of an hour of both of our time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. But the timing to do it mattered. And if I said, let's do it in 6 months, it wouldn't have the same impact. So they would actually be the same hour, but it'd be an hour with a much smaller return later. And I do think of time in terms of return on energy and return on time. So I'm like, let's do it now because it matters most now.
That's so special and so unique. And you did it for someone you don't even know. It's not like I'm your best friend, but like return on timing. So I think that's really, I've never heard anybody talk about that, of the return on timing, that it would have a disproportional impact. And you're right. And you're savvy. So you know that disproportional impact now compared to later. Of course, you could also say, oh, it's perfect timing whenever. I'm
Okay.
curious, Dave, though, I have to
Yeah.
selfishly ask you, if you're working on your 5th book, have you developed systems for your creative process? Like, have you gotten better at it every time, or I'm wondering if you can let us in behind the scenes a little bit.
Hmm. I usually use the 40 years of Zen. Like I go into really deep altered neurofeedback states. And then the book just kind of forms as a picture in my brain, like the whole table of contents. And I know what it is. And then I work with a writing partner where we do a series of like back and forth discussions and interviews. And then that usually massages the structure of the book, where I've built the skeleton and I've architected the muscle. And I've said, okay, based on interviews, let's fill in the easy parts. And then it's my job to do the skin, to go through every word in the book and write and rewrite it. But that step in the middle of having someone help me fill out, okay, here's all the stuff we want to say, but I didn't think about what order to put chapter 7 in. Can you help to order it in a logical fashion and get like the main stuff in so I can fill in like the stories and the unique examples or a research reference? And then the reason I like working with an editor and a writing partner like that is that, well, you have to have accountability, because anyone who's a writer knows that perfectionism is a big issue. The other thing, because we're talking about time in this episode, is that I reserve long blocks of writing time. There's an example of a famous fiction book that I'm forgetting. It was written on paper from a taxi driver. Every time he was waiting for a fare, he'd write a line or two. I'm like, that's a unique brain. Because for me, it takes me about a half hour, unless I'm using electrical stuff on my head, and to get into the writing mode. And then don't take me out of it. It's like writing computer code, right? So if I'm coding, same thing. It's like you go into this altered state and you just crank out. Like I was doing about 7,000 pages a night 2 weeks ago, of like worthy copy, like that's actually done and properly, right? So that's in a 4-hour session, right? But it has to be at the right time of day. I'm a late night because I'm actually a wolf circadian style, but I'm wearing my true dark glasses so I don't break my biology. And I'm just like, I kind of, whoa, I guess I wrote good stuff, and then I go to sleep. So it's different though. If you're a morning person, you do it, but I would say you need at least 2 hours to be worth you talk about friction, there's a switching cost. And for me to go out of like dad mode, right, or friend mode, or learning mode and 70 writing, it's a half hour of just basically screwing around, telling my brain to get into that, and then suddenly I'm like, all right, and then I sit down, but I don't stop. I don't get writer's block ever, and I think that's a function of just a lot of brain training. Oh, and drugs. Smart drugs help.
I know if I have one meeting scheduled, it will actually break my flow. My dad says it's like mosquitoes coalescing on a bare arm. It's just the whole day starts to orient to that
Yeah.
one meeting. I love hearing that you get almost a photo imprint of the table of contents. That is so fascinating. Like the TOC will just drop into your mind formed.
So my very first book that I don't talk about much was a fertility book called The Better Baby Book. So I'm like, the highest ROI on your health is what your mom ate before and during pregnancy. You get that right, and you're going to come out more resilient than average. So that was going to be my second book after the Bulletproof Diet book. But when I came out of this really deep altered state where like kind of reality is blinking in and out, I just picked up and I wrote the table of contents for that book before the diet book. I'm like, okay, I'm doing the Better Baby book. And the next day, Gary Taubes hooks me up with an agent. And then like it was like one thing after another. And it really, it flowed beautifully because I was allowing versus forcing. And it was, I'm going to write a book that's really valuable. But I didn't know which book it was.
Incredible. There's a Zen saying, don't push the river.
Yeah.
Like allowing it and just going with that. It's so interesting.
There's an old talk I gave. It's still online somewhere. It's called The Augmented Author. And it's a 1 hour kind of it was a Bill talk, not a TEDx talk. And Bill is sort of like an unconference of people who are younger and less accomplished, but very passionate, saying, let's give similar style talks. And here's actually how I was putting my brain in that writing state using electrical currents, because you can get that. I could actually get there faster that way. But now that I've done it so much, it's a switchable skill versus a forcible skill. And I talk about all the other things that make the brain so you can just get it out onto paper. But I don't think I'm a normal author that way, because I run at a different speed because 8 years of modafinil and all the other
Right. Like, yeah. Well, it's your proof of the methods, your proof of everything that you talk about, the fact that it does flow like that. And also, as you said, you have now the compound interest or the compound effect and benefit of everything you've been doing. It's funny you mentioned coding because I'm not a coder. As I said, I taught myself HTML and CSS, but that is the one thing that I would lose time. Like when I would work on my early websites back in the day, 2005, 6, 7.
Back in the day, it was 1996.
Yours is way, right. But like, let's say early in my career,
there you go.
The sun would rise and set and I wouldn't even notice. And I know that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow state is at the intersection of challenge and skill. And you, of course, have the bio ingredients of a flow state. But it's interesting with something like coding of how immersive it is. I guess coding, gaming, play, speaking. I mean, there are these things that put us in that pocket. And it's true. It's so valuable. Like you don't want to leave. It's so good to have that open space to get in there and stay there.
And video games are really engaging kind of emotionally, right? Because you put your consciousness into the character and what happens, it feels like it happens to you. It's possible to do that with words too, because the way I write, there has to be a meaning, but each word has an emotional thing it does to you. And most of us never pay any attention to that. But the feel of two different words changes how they land. And when I know I've written something exactly the way I want it, it's like if you see an Olympic diver, they enter the water without a splash, and good words will enter your brain without a splash. And that's a really high standard. I don't always hit it with every line in every book because I think that would take probably 20 times as long, but I hit it really often. And I do that a lot, but that makes writing more of a game. So like, how does that word feel? How does that sentence feel? Like if I was reading that and I didn't know this, would I be confused? Would I be scared? Would I be repulsed? Would I be curious in a good way or curious in a, oh no, I might be wrong way? And all of those, that's constantly running as part of my background process. So, I mean, I could probably do a whole episode on that,
You
but
should.
that would be
It'd be
fun,
so,
actually.
yeah,
Uh,
you should. It's so beautifully said. And just picturing the mind like water, but the words dropping in like a diver, like a precision dive, and knowing when you hit it, knowing when you have that landing.
mhm.
I pictured my book. I picture it trying to fly, and I will imagine what is holding it down. And so I'll talk to the book like, what do you need? What do you need to fly, to be free, to be light and free and fun? And so that will help me kind of cut away what doesn't need to be there. And Nassim Taleb, who wrote Anti-Fragile and so many other things, Black Swan, he said, if you're bored as a writer, then surely the reader's going to be bored. So just stop working on that section altogether. like the writer or the author's boredom or procrastination or dread. Like I say that in free time, how we bake is as important as what we make. Like nobody wants your book if you are miserable writing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's going to come through.
It gets a little more esoteric, but the Buddhist teaching of the Dalai Lama, they limit the number of people who touch your food before you eat it, right? And the consciousness of the person who makes your food actually changes how you feel when you eat it. And the person who roasts your coffee, it's the same way. Guys, you're wondering how I do what I do. That's part of it, right? Like there's intentionality. And you're right. A good writer, even a good public speaker, their intent makes it through, I don't know, energetically into the words. And people who've heard this interview, they know that you're actually like this all the time, as far as I can tell. You're like there's joy in everything. I'm happy. I'm smiling. Right. And it comes through in the way you write too. Like your intent in the book wasn't to get rich by writing free time, but it was to free a lot of time. And I think that.
And also to make systems fun. Like I purposely use a lot of food metaphor, like popcorn, serendipity popcorn, and cookie dough. I talk about perfectionism in the sense that, don't we all agree cookie dough is better than the cookies half the time? So why wait till something's fully baked and perfect? Just get it out there. So I like to think about how can we make business and these ideas less boring. And so, yeah, just having fun. And it's not like, don't get me wrong, anybody listening, I'm not somebody that I feel was born like perpetually happy and indefatigable. I had so much anxiety and worry. And I talk in the book for the first time publicly about an OCD disorder where I literally pull my hair out when I'm stressed. And I still have lingering struggles with that. So for me, it's like, I know what it feels like to be incredibly anxious and stressed and overwhelmed and have pressure. And so part of what you see, Dave, of the sunniness is knowing what it feels like when I don't have that, and just trying to honor myself and my timing and my energy and the way that I work so that I don't return to that place where I'm just bored. I mean, not bored, I'm burnt out and miserable and literally pulling my hair out.
I also had OCD. I get it. And it's like weird compulsions. I used to have like the finger tapping and like face scrunching and all this stuff. And people don't believe me. Like, you're right. And you also had a mild stutter, Dave. Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's all biochemical or neurological or programming. It's all hackable. And it looks like you've done a pretty good job.
I do have hair. You can see it.
Yeah. Your hair looks great. So you're doing it well. And it's also really cool that you talk about it, because it was actually John Chambers, the old CEO of Cisco, when Cisco was basically figuring out how we were going to build the network for the world. He was giving a talk to a bunch of kids, and one of the kids, started crying because they had ADHD, and he's like, "I do too." And he was the first corporate CEO to admit it.
Wow.
And it's like pretty much every entrepreneur has ADHD, and a lot of corporate CEOs do too. Not to mention sociopathy, but
right.
there's that.
Sure.
But I think he kind of cracked it open. So we're like, yeah, let's talk about the fact that everyone's just a person, even if you're successful, and that we'll have stuff like that. So
Yes, and that's
kudos.
so often the success or the adaptive behaviors have come from a place of needing to figure it out. Like, I know I always feel so much more relieved when somebody is just honest about, no, I'm not like this all the time. And let's talk about business. I'm not the end all be all expert on all things business. That's you, Dave. That's not me.
Nah, just don't ask me about finance.
Right.
That was boring.
So I had a lot of imposter syndrome of writing a business book. Like, well, who the hell am I? And there's so many other people who have made gajillions of dollars, and that's not me. But I know that I'm more sensitive. I'm a highly sensitive person and I'm empathic. And there's a lot of things that make it difficult for me to do business in a very typical way, or just the typical factory model or the grind and hustle and all that. And so I kind of tell anybody that I work with, like, you are patient zero, whatever you're struggling with. I grew up, my parents worked full time. I saw how hard they were working. And I had a friend who helps people figure out their zone of genius. And she basically connected the dots that because I grew up feeling like a burden, seeing how hard my parents were working just to provide for us, I seek to now unburden others. And that actually this kind of what drives me, why do I want to create more freedom for myself and others, is because I don't want anybody to feel like a burden, and I want to unburden people of the pressure that I think weighs so many of us down, especially with so many problems in the world. So I don't know. I think talking about both sides of it, there is the really positive vision, and there's also where we've come from and how we've adapted, and doing that in really unhelpful or unskillful ways, as you've been so generous with sharing of your history. And then over time, we learn how to transform it. But for somebody who never struggled with anxiety or OCD or ADHD, it's not even on their radar. They don't have to solve it. They don't have to come up with like intricate, new, innovative solutions because it was just never on their radar in the first place.
Yep. You hit it right on the head. So it comes through in free time. And it's great you talk about it, because if you have anxiety, and by the way, this is the first time in recorded history that when you ask people what they want for their health the most, they did not say weight loss, even though obesity is at an all-time high. They said anxiety and stress reduction. So people are more tweaked now than ever. And it's funny, if you can free up some time, you're going to be less tweaked. And if you can have more energy, you're going to be less tweaked. When you're less tweaked, you're nicer to other people and you're nicer to yourself. And it actually has a really high compounding return. And that's why I thought, you know what, I've got to get you on the show right after your book came out, even though you stepped out of a TED session in order to record this. Thank you.
This is the best session of all. I feel that, see, there's serendipity. I was going to learn how to make ceremonial cacao, and I've never had it. So I'm going to put a pin in the cacao making. I'll learn someday, but this was like the best possible unconference session that I could be doing right now. So I can't thank you enough.
You're very welcome.
And to everybody who's here listening too, thank you. As my friend Neil says, it's like, if you're here now, you've made it to the end of the podcast club.
There you go. And it's freetime.com is where you have stuff about the book. And you have a couple podcasts as well, the Free Time podcast and the Pivot podcast. So guys, if you really, really like Jenny Blake, now you know where to listen to her voice that's always happy.
Thank you. And I have to say thank you, Dave, because this interview, if you enjoyed it, it was powered by Danger Coffee. Your team made me a blended coffee right before I came here. They were like, good luck with the interview. They gave me a refill on my coffee mug. So if I was articulate or interesting in any way, we can just credit it entirely back to you and Danger.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So thank you. Thank you for fueling me. No joke. I actually am feeling great right now. And I really do think it's the coffee.
Oh yeah. That stuff works. And this is the best I've ever made by far. You get back to TED, enjoy yourself, and we'll get this up online for listeners as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.